Welcome. What I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about what causes war, specifically World War II. And so, of course, the standard historical interpretation is World War II is the inevitable result of the Treaty of Versailles and the fact that the Treaty of Versailles was so incredibly harsh. So this is what I want to look at. Let's look at the war itself, World War I, the peace treaty that ends it, compare it maybe to some other treaties, take a look at what's going on in Germany and other countries in the 1930s, the run up to World War II, and see if we can in fact prove that the Treaty of Versailles is responsible for World War II. So World War I, 1914 to 1918, called the Great War, the war to end all wars, the war to make the world safe for democracy. It's a pretty terrible event. It's one of the most traumatic events in all of history and certainly in modern European history. So the war, as I say, lasts for about 4 years. And over the course of the war, about 10 million people are killed, millions more wounded. So the war comes to an end in 1918. Germany is on the losing side. And so the victors gather in Paris in 1919 to put together a comprehensive peace treaty. And the part of the peace treaty that we're most familiar with is known as the Treaty of Versailles. And this is the part of the treaty that deals with Germany. And the Treaty of Versailles is seen as an incredibly harsh treaty. And it's a very detailed treaty, but there's three basic areas that the treaty covers. One is military restrictions on Germany. Another area is the territory that Germany loses as a result of the war. And then a third area are the economic repercussions of the war, the reparations payments and other sort of punishments that are inflicted upon Germany to help them pay for the cost of the war. The first category, in the military, is perhaps the most stunning when you look at it on the face. When you think of at a single battle in World War I, like the Battle of Verdun, that Germany lost hundreds of thousands of men killed and wounded, it's really kind of amazing to see that the victorious Allies, after the war, required that the German army be made up of no more than 100,000 men with no more than 4,000 officers. They also had restrictions on the type of military equipment they could have. So, for example, they were not allowed to have any airplanes at all. They were not allowed to have any poison gas at all. And the number of ships in their navy was strictly limited to 6 battleships and a handful of smaller ships. And so this brings Germany from one of the world's greatest military powers before the war to one of the weakest militaries in all of Europe. As far as territory goes, to be honest, Germany doesn't really lose that much territory considering the scale of the war. Germany loses an area called Alsace-Lorraine on the border with France. This is a territory that Germany had only taken from France about 45 years earlier. And so some of the people in that territory identify as Germans, but many of them identify as French people. The Germans also lose a territory in eastern Germany called Prussia and the city of Danzig, and this is considered by Germans to be a terrible blow to their national pride and a great loss of territory. These are really the only two major areas that Germany loses to European powers in Europe itself, although Germany does lose all of its colonies in Africa and Asia as a result of the war. Now, one of the territories that Germans are very upset about is a region called the Saar. And in this area, the Germans have to turn over a lot of the coal that's produced in this very important area in the western part of Germany. They have to turn it over to the victorious Allies. And there's also a mandate that this area is administered by the League of Nations, kind of this early form of the United Nations that's created after the war. And after 15 years, the people in that area would have to vote as to whether they remained part of Germany or became independent or part of some other country. And so the Germans were quite upset about this part of the treaty. The last part of the treaty that I wanted to talk about, and there are other parts, but the last major part is related to the economic consequences of the war for Germany. And the most infamous is the reparations payments. And these weren't even specified how much exactly Germany would have to pay, but it was a huge sum of money. And in fact, because Germany stopped paying these reparations payments under Hitler, and after World War II, Germany was not required to make these payments while Germany was divided into two countries. it was really just a couple years ago that Germany was finished paying off these reparations payments. So this seems huge. And another major economic consequence is related to the chemical industry, that Germany had to turn over some of their most advanced chemical formula and then some of their stockpile of chemical dyes and fertilizers and things like this to the Allies. And another major economic blow to Germany was that they had to turn over a huge amount of their shipping. All their large merchant ships, their medium merchant ships, they had to turn over a very high portion of those. And even small fishing vessels, they had to turn over a quarter of their small fishing vessels to the victorious Allies. So this represents quite a blow to the German economy. So how does this compare to other peace treaties, right? This is what you need to look at if we're trying to decide if this is a harsh treaty or not. So I think the two most relevant treaties to look at would be the Treaty of Frankfurt, that Germany imposes upon France after they defeat France in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, and the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk during World War I itself, where Germany defeats Russia and imposes this treaty on Russia. So, in the Treaty of Frankfurt, Germany takes territory from France. Guess what? Alsace-Lorraine, and makes France pay reparations payments. Some historians argue that the reparations payments imposed on France, given the size of the economy and inflation and all these other factors, was actually more harsh than the reparations payments that Germany had to suffer as a result of World War I. Interesting. The territory that Russia loses in the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk compared to the territory that Germany loses at Versailles is incredible. Russia loses about a third of its population as a result of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. They lose a chunk of their best farmland. They lose about half of their total industrial capacity. So when we compare the Treaty of Versailles that Germany had to sign to the treaties that Germany made other people sign, it's starting to look maybe not quite as harsh as people think. And one of the historians who's been challenging this standard historical interpretation that Versailles causes World War II is a woman named Margaret Macmillan. Now, she's the great-granddaughter of one of the people who creates the Treaty of Versailles. So maybe she's a little biased, I don't know. But she's got some good points. Let's take a look at some of these points that historians like Macmillan make about the Treaty of Versailles and World War II. So who causes World War II? Hitler. Everybody knows this, right? Hitler causes World War II. Of course he does. So therefore, the Treaty of Versailles, in order to have caused World War II, must have caused the rise of Hitler, right? So let's take a look at this. Is Hitler the only dictator in Europe in the 1930s? I guess not, right? Take a look at this. We got Mussolini in Italy. We've got Franco in Spain. We've got Stalin in the Soviet Union. Numerous dictators in some of the smaller countries. We also have, over in Asia, we have the rise of the influence of the military in Japan under the domination of a guy named Tojo. So how could all of these dictators be caused by the Treaty of Versailles? Obviously they weren't, right? So something's going on in the world in the 1920s and 30s to cause the rise of dictators. And it's not necessarily the Treaty of Versailles. So we've got a couple of things going on. We have countries that have a very weak history of democracy. We have worldwide economic upheaval with the Great Depression. And we have widespread bitterness and dissatisfaction with the results of the war, even on people that were on the winning side. And we have numbers of veterans who come home from the war feeling quite embittered and angry and perhaps bearing some psychological scars from the war. And we have charismatic dictators who are able to manipulate these economic conditions, these political conditions, these cultural conditions, in a situation where for a long time people have been feeling like the world is falling apart. You can look to the 19th century and you have people saying, that the rise of new science, of evolution, is challenging traditional religion. You have people like Freud questioning the way that we operate, the way people think, and what makes us good or bad. We have art like the Impressionist artists who are saying that the world isn't really the way it looks. And there's a sense that people are feeling like this world is falling apart. And the dictators say, we're going to give you order. We're going to make this all make sense for you. Let us do the thinking. You do the obeying, and it's all going to work out. Treaty of Versailles doesn't create this. Not at all. So let's look at the idea that Hitler is very aggressive, military aggression, right? So is he the only person? Is he the only dictator engaging in acts of military aggression in the time between World War I and World War II? I don't think so. You've got Italy invading Ethiopia. You've got the Soviet Union in 1940 invading the Baltic states, trying to take over Finland and failing. You have, of course, Japan invading China, taking over northeastern China in 1931 and going back for a second big bite in 1937. So Hitler's not the only aggressive dictator. So again, something else is going on that might not be related to the Treaty of Versailles. So the other thing is, specifically with Hitler, what do people do about him? Well, the Western powers fail to confront Hitler. When Hitler takes Sudetenland in western Czechoslovakia, when he remilitarizes the Rhineland, when he takes the rest of Czechoslovakia, people fail to confront him. Is that the fault of the Treaty of Versailles? Well, here maybe it is. Because maybe people in France and Great Britain, they look at the Treaty of Versailles and they consider it to be excessively harsh, and maybe they're thinking that, well, Hitler's got kind of a point when he needs to build up the military again. They might say, well, we did force them to make their military too small. Great Britain negotiates a separate treaty with Hitler in the 1930s saying, okay, you can build more battleships than the Treaty of Versailles say. Is that the fault of the Treaty of Versailles or the fault of the British negotiators who say, okay, go ahead and build more ships and there won't be any diplomatic consequences or military consequences? Really, you can argue that the fault is not with the Treaty of Versailles itself, but the fact that the Western powers failed to enforce it. And if they had enforced it more aggressively, then Hitler would have been deterred earlier in the 1930s and maybe would not have been encouraged to launch this massive war of aggression in 1939. So these are just a couple of things to chew over as you think about, did the Treaty of Versailles cost World War I? Well, it wasn't that much worse than treaties that Germany had imposed on other countries. There were dictators that arose in other countries that were not subject to the Treaty of Versailles, even in countries that were on the victorious side, on the Allied side during World War I. And there were a number of countries that engaged in acts of military aggression in Europe and elsewhere, again, besides Germany. So, Treaty of Versailles, does it directly cause the rise of Hitler? Does it directly cause World War II? I don't think it does. What I think it does do, however, is it allows the fascist dictatorship in Germany to be particularly virulent. It allows Hitler to easily spread his lies that supposedly Germany was winning World War I and they were betrayed by people within Germany who hated Germany. They weren't true Germans, of course. Betrayed by, in Hitler's view and the Nazis' view, the Jews, this internal cabal of people that wanted to destroy Germany. And Hitler is able to exploit some of the more obvious humiliations of the treaty, particularly regarding the military, particularly regarding the control of the region of the Saar, and was able to exploit those and create this impression that a great injustice had been done to Germany. And ironically, this idea that the Treaty of Versailles represents a historical injustice of unprecedented magnitude is one of Hitler's lies that continues to be, in a sense, perpetuated. And so I think a more subtle interpretation of the Treaty of Versailles is warranted. But feel free to disagree with me if you like. Hey, that's what history's all about. We can take something that we believe is a settled historical fact that the Treaty of Versailles causes World War II, and 70, 75 years later, we can take a look at World War II, almost 100 years after World War I and after the Treaty of Versailles, we can take a look at this and we can still argue about the meaning of this and the impact of it down to today. Interesting stuff. Thanks for watching.